One, continuing the financial theme of the morning from the tax rate, sales tax, the general fund sources. We want to shift gears now slightly to talk about the revenue streams for our water and wastewater utility. As you recall, just prior to the budget adoption earlier this year, we did a similar rate study, rate analysis of our energy services department. And the net impact of that was actually a 10% reduction in electric rates across all users of our system, and a sustained no increase rate for the natural gas utility. So water, calculating water resource rates and calculating electric natural gas rates are two totally different processes. And there are a lot of factors to consider when setting water rates. Traditionally, the city of Monroe has had one water rate and has not had a tiered system. So we want to, based on feedback that we received earlier this year, council was interested in exploring the possibility of a tiered rate system. So you will be receiving information on that today. So at this time, I'll invite Mr. Scott Clark, who is the Director of Water Resources, up to introduce this topic and introduce our consultants that have been working on the rate study for quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Clark. I'm the Water Resources Director. We went through a successful request for qualifications and selected Raptels as our rate study consultant. They've been in the business for over 30 plus years. And Melissa Levin is our project manager on this project, conducting the rate study, looking at our system development fees, our rates, all of our capital projects, and conducting the study overall. So lead the team. Melissa Levin has been in the, am I pronouncing it right?
Levin, yes.
Levin. Melissa Levin has been in the industry for over 25 years. We'll go ahead and welcome her up here to present their presentation. Thank you.
Mayor, council members, city manager, thank you all for letting us be here with you today. As Scott said, we've been working on a comprehensive water and sewer rate financial planning study, along with system development fee charges. Presentation today is really going to be three different parts. We're going to start with what I call a financial plan. We're going to look at the level of revenues that need to be generated from the water and sewer rates over the next 5 years in that financial plan. Then we're going to move to rate structure adjustments. What are some of the different things that we can do with the rate structure to recover that revenue that's needed? And then lastly, we're going to get into the system development fee analysis, those charges. All right. So starting with the financial plan. What we mean with the financial plan is we are looking at a 5-year forecast. We do it on a cash needs basis. So we are looking at all of the expenses the utility has over the next 5 years and the revenues that they're going to be generating. With the expenses, what we mean by that is we're looking at operating and maintenance expenses, annual existing debt service, funding the capital plan, which is basically proposed annual debt service and also cash funded capital. And then any transfers to reserves that are needed. So those are all the expenses that we have to factor in over the next 5 years. And then we look at the revenue side. You really generate revenue from 3 different types of revenue streams. your monthly user rates, your system development fee charges, and then what I call miscellaneous customer service type fees, like payment fees, tap fees, those kind of things, okay? So when we're looking at it over the next 5 years, we're looking at how well do the revenues that we're projecting cover the expenses that we're projecting. And then we also need to take into account financial policies. Financial policies are things like your savings, what is in your reserve funds, but it's also a debt service coverage ratio. You are legally required to hit certain debt service coverage ratios if you issue debt. So we're monitoring all of those financial targets. All right. Whoop, sorry. Didn't know this didn't come in. We're going to start with the first piece of the expenses, and that is your operating expenses. For our 5-year forecast period, what we did was we started with our fiscal year 25 budget, reduced that budget by about 5%, and that was to really make that fiscal year 25 budget more in line with how you have historically performed. Normally, you come in a little bit less than what budget is, so we were trying to be realistic about our projections, so we reduced it by 5. And then what we did was we escalated it 3% each year for the forecast period. So when we look out over the next 5 years, started with a 25-year budget, reduced it by 5%, and then escalated it 3% each year over that forecast period. Next piece of the expenses, the capital plan, and this is a biggie. Right now in the 5-year capital plan, we have $169.8 million in capital expenses. We're looking at funding that through a combination of different things. $100 million of that's going to be funded through a revenue bond. We've projected $39 million of that to be funded through our system development fee reserves, and then $30.8 million of it's going to be funded directly through rates. So it's going to be cash funded directly through your rates. All right. For that $100 million debt issue that we've assumed in our forecast period, we've assumed a 30-year revenue bond at 5% interest. So that's where the debt service kind of comes in. We have also, and this is really for the baseline, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the slides, but for our baseline scenario, we have assumed that Union County participates in the debt service on that $100 million at the rate of 23.33%. That is the part of the wastewater treatment plant that they've got reserve capacity or have that option. What we've assumed is that they would pay for part of the debt service of that $100 million issue. And so you can see our debt service here on the screen. Right now, we've got about $1.5 million of existing debt service each year that is paid. If we were to issue that revenue bond, that's going to add $6.5 million of debt service each year for that wastewater treatment plant. So we're talking about going from $1.5 million to about right at $8 million a year for debt service associated with a wastewater treatment plant expansion. All right. So that's the expense side. We talked about the operating expenses and then funding that capital plan, both rate funding, system development fee funding, and then the debt service that we're looking at over the next 5 years. On the flip side of that, the revenue side, what we've assumed for the revenue side is when we look at our monthly user rates, we've multiplied those monthly user rates times the accounts and the usage. And then we make the projection of the revenues out over the next 5 years. We've assumed 1.5% annual growth in the number of accounts and then 1.25% annual growth in usage. That is a little bit lower than what you've historically grown. It's been more in the neighborhood of 2.5% in your number of accounts when we look at the last 5 years. So we've been fairly conservative in our projections of those monthly user rate revenues. For system development fee revenue, last year you brought in about 6.2. We brought that down to $5 million, and we're using $5 million over the forecast period. Just to be conservative, we don't want to be banking on revenue from growth that may or may not happen. So we've used that $5 million and held that constant throughout the forecast period. And the same thing with our miscellaneous revenues, and that's the customer service type fees that you all charge. We're holding those constant through the forecast period. All right, so we talked a little about the revenues and the expenses, and we're going to look here in a minute to see how well those revenues cover the expenses. But one of the things that we have to just be cognizant about is your financial policies. Right now, and I say that, let me back up here for a second. You know, I've heard a lot about enterprise funds. If you think about what is an enterprise fund, well, an enterprise fund has to operate similar to a business. You have to generate revenues to cover the expenses. It has to be self-supporting. So we need to make sure the revenues are covering all of the expenses. But we also need to hit your financial policy targets. Talked a little bit about reserve funds. Historically, the city has kept 100% of O&M in a reserve fund. I know that was recently reduced to, I think, 60% of operating expenses. For our forecast period, we've kind of held it at 100% of O&M. The reason being is, if you are going to issue debt, we want to make sure that we've got 100% of O&M sitting in our reserve funds. Rating agencies are going to be looking for that. When you go out to Moody's, S&P, Fitch to get your rating, they're going to want to see 100% of operating sitting in a reserve fund. So for our forecast period, we've held it at 100% of O&M in that reserve fund. Similarly, debt service coverage, you are legally required to hit 1.25 on your parity debt coverage and 1.0 on your total debt service coverage. We've targeted 1.5 for parity debt coverage on the forecast period. That is another thing that rating agencies are going to be looking at. Is it 1.5 or greater? The benefit of getting a good rating from these rating agencies, the Moody's, the S&P, and the Fitch, is it gives you a lower interest rate on those bonds when you get ready to issue those bonds. So we want to get a very beneficial interest rate. So we want to show that we've got the right amount in our operating reserves and that we're hitting certain debt service coverage ratios. And just to clarify for you guys what a debt service coverage ratio is it is, just so that it doesn't sound completely Greek, it is when you look at your revenues that are coming in each year and you pull out your operating expenses, it's that net revenue number. How many times does that cover your annual debt service? Legally, you need to cover it 1.25 times. We're targeting 1.5 times. Okay. All right, so where the rubber hits the road, based on all of the assumptions that we just talked about, operating expenses those assumptions associated with operating expenses, the capital plan, the debt service, and the revenues that are being generated through your existing rates, assuming growth, we're going to need about an 8% increase annually in the first 3 years to be able to get up to the point where we can pay for all of those expenses that we're projecting. And again, that pays for the $169.8 million 5-year capital plan. So we're looking at 8% annual increases for fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 28. You see it drop back down to 2% once we get up over that hump. It looks to be that we are good. So right now we're really just focused on these first 2 or 3 years, just getting you guys in the right spot to be able to really be in a good financial position to issue debt, have the right amount of reserves, have the right debt service coverage, and to be able to pay for all of that capital plan. This assumes participation from Union County, the 8%. So the 8% that you're seeing right here assumes Union County participation, but you can see that red line right there. That is the revenues that you would get in the door with that 8% annual increase. And then over to the right-hand side, we've got the debt service coverage and our operating days cash on hand that we're tracking, so that you can see that those are all above the line where we've targeted and that they're doing the things, they're where they need to be. All right. If Union County does not participate in the wastewater treatment plant expansion, instead of an 8% annually, we are looking at a 10% annual rate increase for the next 3 years. And I know I'm moving through this pretty quickly. I'll get through the slides and then please ask me questions. All right, so that's our financial plan, kind of based on all of those expenses, based on the revenues, the growth that we discussed. We're looking at the 8% and or the 10%, depending on the participation. Going forward, I'm going to assume that Union County has participated, so when you see these rate structure adjustments, it assumes that 8% annual increase. Okay, we wanted to put some different rate structure options in front of you all. I know the city manager mentioned a tiered rate structure. I know that's something that you guys were interested in seeing, so that is definitely one of the options. But the first kind of options with rate increases that we looked at was just doing an across-the-board increase, 8%. What does that mean? That is an 8% increase to your fixed component of your rate structure and then also that volumetric component. Right now, you guys have your fixed charges that escalate by meter size, and then you've got a uniform volumetric rate for all usage. Everyone pays the same uniform volumetric rate. We would assume that those, both the fixed and that volumetric, go up by 8% each year of the next 3 years. So that's one alternative that we looked at. The second one is not an 8% across the board, but a 4% on that fixed charge, which is those meter sizes. So you would assume that all of those meter sizes get a 4% increase and then a 9% increase on the volumetric. The reason being is that you are recovering a good amount of revenue from your fixed charges. Those really do not have to increase. You're recovering the cost that you should be through those fixed charges. So they are at a good position. So we're just giving those an inflationary increase and putting the bulk of the increase on that volumetric, putting the 9% on the volumetric. This is beneficial to your lower volume users to have a 4% on the fixed charge and then put the 9% on the volumetric. It's those folks that don't use a lot of water, the two-person household that maybe are retired or on a fixed income, they tend to be lower users. This protects them to do a 4% on the fixed and then the 9% on the volumetric, because that is part of the bill. They can't control that fixed charge because you're assessing that regardless of whether they use anything or not. Sort of related to doing a 4% and a 9% on the fixed and the volumetric, we looked at a tiered structure. We looked at doing the 4% on the fixed charges and then doing a 9% on the volumetric. But for that residential customer class, they would go through a 3-tiered structure, an increasing block structure. So the more that they use, the more they pay. And if you have irrigators, those folks with the irrigation meters, they're going to pay more for their irrigation. And the non-residential customers would just see that 9%. So when we got ready to draw the blocks for the residential customer classes, you'll see here that red bar. That is your customers that use 4,000 gallons of usage. 55% of your residential customer base uses 4,000 gallons or less. You see the highest bar is the 3,000 gallons. The most bills issued for your residential class are 3,000 gallon users. So that is your most typical users, the 3,000 gallon. The average user is more around the 4,000 gallon usage. So that's about 4,000 gallons, that's 55% of your bills, that's 61% of the residential usage. At 12,000 gallons, that's 95% of your residential users and about 90% of the residential usage. So that's where we decided to draw the tiers as our first pass for the tiered structure is at 4,000 gallons and at 12,000 gallons. So we're going to capture 60% of the usage in tier 1. All right. So this is what those water rate options look like. You see the current rates there, the 1409, 2664, and so on, depending on the meter sizes. If you were to do, and this is just the water rates, if you were to do an 8% across the board, you see the fixed charges jump up to 1522, 2878, and so on as we go down through there. The volume charge would be 356 for all users if we just did an across the board increase. All right? If we choose to do a 4 and a 9, 4% on the fixed and 9 on the volume, you're looking at a fixed charge for a 3/4 inch meter, which is really the bulk of all of your residential class, is 1466. So it's a little bit less than doing the 8%. And some of those meter charges is a little less than doing the 8%. But you see the volumetric rate down there, instead of 356, it's 359. So 3 cents more, not a significant difference, but a little bit of a difference. The tiered rate system, that's the same fixed charges, $14.66 and so on. But you see that tiered rate coming into effect on the residential, for the residential customers. Tier 1 would be $3.29. That's exactly what they pay now. So for 55% of your customer base, they would not see an increase for their Tier 1 rate. Their rate, volumetric rate, would stay the same. It would just be their fixed charge that would increase, okay? But as you use more, if you get over 4,000 gallons, you would pay $3.93 per 1,000 gallons for those next tranches of 1,000-gallon usage. And then if you get over 12,000 gallons of usage, that's a heck of a lot of usage for residential customers, it would be $4.59. This scenario assumes that all irrigation usage would be charged at $4.59 per 1,000 gallons.
I think the selling feature on the irrigation meter is that you're not paying sewer.
Correct. You're not paying sewer on that irrigation.
So is that gonna be a wash, or are you gonna see people abandoning use of a separate irrigation meter?
The sewer rates are higher, and it typically costs more to operate sewer, and especially when you guys are looking at a wastewater treatment plant expansion, it is more beneficial for them to keep the irrigation meters and pay the irrigation rate. And then you see your non-residential class there. They would be just a straight $3.59 for all usage. They do not go through a tiered system. It's just for all of their usage, it's $3.59 per 1,000 gallons. We just chose to show the water rates here. For sewer, we would not put a tiered system in. It would just be a uniform, continue to be a uniform rate and the fixed charges. And it would go, you would either do the 8% or the 4 and the 9 on the sewer side.
I have a question. Under this tier structure, so will these adjustments be made automatically depending on the usage of water?
We would, yes, we would have to go into the billing system and set it up to where when they, used over 4,000 gallons, it would kind of trip the billing feature and move them into that second tier.
Thank you.
All right. We have a few residential sample bills here using the different scenarios. And I think the takeaway from this residential monthly bill chart is if you look at those low volume residential customers, the 2,000, the 4,000, 5,000, and even the 6,000 gallon users, because most of them are in Tier 1, and we're not really talking about increasing the volumetric rate, they would not really see that big of an increase in their monthly bill. You see, let's just take a 4,000 gallons because that is kind of that first break. Their increase to that 4,000 gallon bill is 4.64%. That would be what they would see on their monthly bill, a 4.6% increase. Versus if we did the 8%, they would be looking at an roughly 8% increase if we just were to do it 8% across the board. Right? The other thing to point out on the opposite end of that spectrum, when you get up there and you're a 10,000 gallon user or a 12,000 gallon user, the impact on your monthly bill is more than if you were just to do an 8,000 gallon user, or 8% increase. If you think about kind of what are the costs associated with water, like it is really the design of the waste, or the water, excuse me, I'm having word issues. It is really the design of the water treatment plant. You're having to build that water treatment plant to be able to accommodate these folks that are really peaking your usage. It's your irrigators, it's the folks that are using a lot. It's expensive to expand a water treatment plant. So what this tiered structure does is it really pushes more of the cost towards those folks that are requiring you to increase your capacity in your water treatment plant and that are creating the peaks in the usage. If you think about it, you can't design a water treatment plant for average use. You got to be able to accommodate those customers when they're peaking in the summer and everyone's irrigating and everyone's using a whole heck of a lot of water. You've got to be able to provide service. So that's where the costs are for water.
So is it fair to say that based on a tiered structure like this, it promotes water conservation in the higher tiers.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay.
And it also, the benefit of it also is it really protects your tier one customers that are your average users that are not, that are more kind of cognizant of their water usage and are, able to control it. It protects those folks that aren't using a lot.
And I guess there could be some conclusions drawn or some assumptions drawn that, that could be households with limited income, that could be households with one or two people, retired individuals,
Correct.
all of that. So, and based on our customer makeup, if I heard you correctly, that basically 55% of our residential customers fall within that category.
That is correct, yes.
It's huge.
We also included some non-residential monthly bills. There's not a lot of difference with the non-residential monthly bills because we're talking about, we're not putting in a tiered structure, we're talking about either the 8% or the 4 and the 9. So you see a little bit of a difference, but not a substantial difference. You see up there with a 500,000 gallon user per month, it's about a 1% difference in his monthly bill, 8% versus the 9%. And that really has to do with a lot with the fixed charge of their bill is a very small portion versus the actual use, the volumetric part of the bill.
So, if I may, on the non-residential, what we're talking about is commercial and industrial.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we have our largest commercial water customer is using in excess of 1 million gallons a day.
Mhm.
So, and if I'm not mistaken, the city of Monroe has a separate contract with that user. Is that right?
I believe that is the case.
No?
No.
Okay, so how is this going to impact that user?
It's gonna hit them significantly. They'll see a substantial increase. However, they have a sewer deduct meter that they only pay for sewer and not the processed water. There's a good bit of water that does not enter the sanitary sewer system. So that does help.
Okay.
This is a bill comparison for your residential 3,000 gallon user. You can see the red bar right there in the middle that's kind of on the left of center. That is the current city of Monroe rates compared to other current rates when you look across many other communities that you guys are comparable and similar to. I guess the one takeaway from this is you are really kind of solidly in the middle and on the lesser side of the middle. And I think the message here that we were kind of thinking is there is some runway there to increase rates. Another thing to point out is when you look at the national average annual increase, it's about 5.5% for water and sewer. So typically, when you look across the country, water and sewer utilities are increasing rates at a rate of 5.5% each year.
Before you go off this, so the green bar on the right-hand side is Union County
Yes,
water.
and sewer, yes.
And so similar to the debt service chart you saw earlier, where it was like the 8%, 8%, when the county sold bonds for the $300 million Yadkin River Water Project, there was a similar requirement of going up a pretty substantial percentage each year. And I'm not mistaken, they probably have 3 or 4 years left in their increases left to go. So what you see now is not what it's going to be, 4 years from now. It's going to be significantly different, higher. Depends on which tier you go with, and how that works out.
I have a question, this may be geared towards you, Mr. Clark. So Tyson, how long have they been operating at the current fee schedule? And with this current fee schedule, have there been any substantial price adjustments with that?
Price adjustments have only occurred each year when council votes for a new rate increase, and during that time, they've been effective.
Okay, you know how long they've been operating under this current fee schedule?
From the beginning, since they first moved here.
Okay.
I can't remember what was the prior company's name, but they have been, we've been under this standard fixed rate schedule for many, many years.
Okay. Yeah.
You work with communities across the nation in this exact same process and these exact same questions and looking at these different scenarios and is it accurate to say that under the single tier method that we're using today, that these 55% of our customers under that 4,000 gallons, that their rates collected from them actually subsidize the higher water users? Is that an accurate assumption or statement?
I don't know if that's, I would say you get your bulk of, well, I honestly would need to look at that before I made that statement, but the bulk of your customers are residential users, so you do get a lot of revenue in from your residential class. I think, is it 94? You've got Ford with me here, but is it 93 or 94% of your users are residential customers, and it's just a kind of a few large industries and other commercial customers? Yeah.
So under a tiered system, though, there would be a cost shift.
There would be a cost shift, mostly within the residential class. For the residential class, you're kind of ultimately recovering the same level of revenue as the non-residential classes. You're really recovering that same price per 1,000 gallons. It's just being recovered through a tiered system because residential customers can typically control their discretionary water use versus a non-residential, it's operating business. It is what it is, and the things that they can do, the sewer deduct meters and those kind of things they've done. Is that?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so that's what we've got for our financial plan and then our rate structure options that we looked at. I'm going to move to the...
Do you have an analysis that does not assume county participation?
That is the 10%, so it's either 8% or 10% if you guys do not get participation from the county. And we didn't roll that through the tiered system, just because for now we were assuming that they would participate, but it would be easy to do. I'm going to move to the system development fees. So changing gears, we've just talked a little bit about the monthly user rates, so system development fees. For those of you that aren't familiar with a system development fee, a system development fee is a one-time charge assessed to new development to basically pay for the cost of the facilities that are needed to support growth. So what those customers are paying for is capacity in your system. This is typically paid for through builders and developers. It doesn't hit your existing customer base. It's usually passed on through the cost of the home. And if you think about kind of what it is, Your existing customers have been here paying for the system, paying the capital, paying, capital on the system, helping to pay for the capital. This capacity fee or this system development fee, what it does is it's a one-time charge. It puts these new customers on the same level as the existing customers. So you're kind of buying in on the front end to bring them up to that same level as the existing customers that have been paying for the system all along. So, prior to 2017, utilities would charge system development fees. You see these on people's schedules. Different utilities, they call them system development fees, they call them impact fees, they call them capital recovery fees, facility investment fees, capacity fees, all different types of things. But they are system development fees. And in 2017, the state of North Carolina adopted House Bill 436, which basically was enabling legislation to all the utilities to be able to kind of legally assess these fees to developers and builders. House Bill 436 has gone through, I think, 4 iterations since it was adopted in 2017, so it's had kind of changes along the way. So the way that you did your old system development fee calculations doesn't necessarily work for the way that they have to be done now. This has been kind of an ongoing thing between developers and the state government and different utilities. It's been very litigious. So we've used kind of the latest amended legislation that I believe was amended last year, so we've kind of taken into account all of those different amendments that have happened. But this enabling legislation is very prescriptive. It tells us the process that we have to go to adopt the fees. It tells us the process that we have to go through to calculate the fees. It tells us that they have to be done every 5 years. They have to be done by a financial professional that has experience in calculating the fees. In addition to those things, it actually gives you a process to adopt the fees. And so we've included a timeline here. When we get to the point of where we're happy with the fees, we do the written analysis. So we will write a report for these fees. This has to be posted on a website for 45 days and made available to the public so that they can provide comments for these fees. And then after the comments have been made by the public, the comments have to be considered into the analysis, and then it goes through a public hearing, and then you can adopt the fees. I say this only because you cannot make the decision to adopt the fees today. You would have to have the report, you would have to post it, you would have to wait, and then go through a public hearing. We put a timeline here just to kind of estimate when we think the earliest might be that the fees could actually be adopted. And so you see we've got task 1 ongoing, and then task 2, that's the 45 days. If we post it October 1st is kind of what we were thinking, we could have the report ready, post it October 1st, let it sit out there for 45 days, get the comments in, react to the comments. We could conduct a public hearing December 10th, and then that they might potentially be adopted, into effect January 1. But that would be really kind of be on the earliest side of when we could make that happen.
And that would be you looking for direction from this. So you're saying, from leaving this basically today, tomorrow, with direction from council, then we're starting October 1st, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
A question, you said we have to have consideration for the public comment.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that whatever was stated, you actually do just have to consider it.
We just have to take into account. I think they want to give folks the opportunity to weigh in so that you all can take that into consideration when you ultimately adopt the fees.
So, Mayor, to your point, again, the way we've structured today, we're talking about basically all things financial this morning. This afternoon, you will hear more about this capital project to expand the wastewater treatment plant. And we will talk about where the initial projections were on cost. You've already heard a couple of times today, this exponential growth in building material costs and those types of things. And we'll show you how that number swelled until recently when staff was challenged with getting that number back down into something that potentially we could afford. You'll be hearing all of that information, so you'll be seeing what you're getting for what you're spending, okay? That doesn't mean that you have to take any votes this afternoon, but if we could get some consensus on whether this project is going to move forward or not move forward, that impacts all of this, okay? And that may be something that y'all want to delay giving a consensus on today till tomorrow. You can certainly do that, but before this 2 days is over, we would really like to have a consensus from city council as to, is the project moving forward or not? That
Not really consensus, vote.
a consensus would be, we're gonna start this process, then you'll be taking votes on these, you'll be taking votes on construction contracts, you know, is green lighting us moving forward with bringing those other things back to you for the votes to make this project happen.
In other words, 4 votes, we lose it.
If you get a consensus, I'd like to have
I know you want, I know you want to do that.
a unanimous consensus on a project like this.
So really, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're asking from us after we get all this information is to give you hopefully a unanimous consensus to move forward so that we can vote on these things as you break them down.
Right, when
That's
it's,
the vote will happen.
It's not the final vote.
Right, it's just
Yeah.
moving forward and getting us more information.
it starts the process so that fees can be adopted. It starts the process so fees can be adopted in January. It starts the process
Right,
for finishing up the design, hearing where we're at, how that process has changed.
right.
Y'all being comfortable with the direction that staff is taking.
Right, that would.
And then, and with the consensus, we will move forward, and when it's time to bring construction
Gotcha.
contracts back, we'll bring it.
I'd like just for you to vote in parts, and we try to vote all at one time, it's easy to understand what we voting on. You got to this part, vote on that, unless that's a purpose.
Well, I really want you to hear this afternoon about this construction, because this is all predicated, every bit of this is predicated on moving on that forward with that $1 million project.
Okay, so it's not voting on this, and voting on the stuff, it's all the
It
same.
would be, if this moves forward, then basically you're saying the construction project is going to move forward.
I'm not gonna be here, so my people is still trained.
You want me to vote for you, Mr. Lynch? I can vote for you. Yeah. Just leave me a note.
All right. I mentioned that the legislation is prescriptive. It actually lays out 3 different methodologies that we can use. There is a buy-in methodology, which is backward-looking. It assumes that you have capacity in your existing assets. The calculation is done based on accounting records, and we calculate the replacement cost new less depreciation. That's the cost of replacing those assets exactly as they exist today. So that is one methodology that is the cost basis. Second methodology is the marginal incremental approach. That is more forward-looking. It is based on a capital improvement plan, an approved capital improvement plan, and that capital plan becomes the cost basis for the calculation. And then there is a combined approach, which is just looking at both of the approaches together. Sometimes you have capacity in your system, but you're already planning for that next tranche of capacity, or you've got significant projects associated with the lines to deliver that capacity. So you can use a combined approach for the calculation of these fees.
And what is the preferred way?
There's not a preferred way, it's just, it depends on your particular situation. Do you have capacity in the existing system, or do you need to, are you already kind of building capacity, or, planning to build capacity? For the water system, we used a combined approach. You have capacity in your water system. There are some significant capital projects associated with water lines that we wanted to include in the calculation, so we did the combined approach for water. For the sewer system, we did the marginal incremental approach. That's the forward-looking approach. It's that wastewater treatment plant expansion that we've got sitting out there. My understanding was that the capacity in the existing system has really kind of already in use or has been allocated for other customers that are existing. I'm getting ready to go into some numbers here, so I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. I know you got them in front of you, so I'll try not to get too much in the weeds here. But when we look at, this is for the water system because we did do that combined approach, so we had to do the buy-in, which is the capacity in the existing assets. We calculated an RC&LD, that replacement cost new less depreciation, of $112.8 million for the water system assets. We have to pull out anything that has been contributed. You did not pay for it, so we cannot include it in the calculation. We also have to pull out non-core assets, vehicles, meters, things like that that aren't part of the core assets that are really needed for the system. So those items have been pulled out. We also have to pull out the outstanding debt principal. If you think about it, you still own it, you haven't paid for it yet, it has to be deducted. So we ended up with an $81.9 million value for the replacement cost, new less depreciation for the water system. That water system provides 13.09 MGD of capacity, so we come up with a cost per gallon per day of $6.26 for the water system capacity. And that's for what's existing. Now, when we look at the growth-related projects for the water system, you can see on the left-hand side under water, it says redoing the combined. There's also $13.2 million of growth-related lines in your CIP. We have to pull out the net present value of the bond principal amount to fund those lines, which is about 3.3. Come up with a cost of expansion of 9.9. And the capacity, the same 13.09 that's in your existing system. So you come up with 76 cents. These two are added together, the 76 cents and the 626 that you saw on the previous slide. That 626 and the 76, because it's all part of the same system. So it's going to be a cost per gallon of $7.02. On the sewer side, we're just doing the forward-looking approach, that marginal incremental approach. See that $100 million wastewater treatment plant expansion. We had to back out the net present value of the bond principal payments. Cost is $63.3 million that can be recovered through this fee. It's giving you 3 MGD. So the cost per gallon is $21.12 on the wastewater side. All right, you can see there, these are the actual calculations. See the 702 on the water side, that's your cost per gallon per day. It is multiplied times 360 gallons per day. What that is an estimate of a level of service for each of your single-family residential homes. When we're planning for the single-family residential home and we're trying to decide when do we build that next tranche of capacity for water, we're assuming that all those homes at max day or peak might use 360 gallons per day. This is down a little bit from the last study. The last study had a fairly aggressive level of service of 400 gallons per day, so this has been reduced to 360. Our charge per residential equivalent unit, which is basically your single-family residential household, is $2,528 for that development fee for that 3/4 inch meter, which is that single-family home. On the sewer side, $21.12 cost per gallon. We've assumed a level of service of 240 gallons per day. If you use the state guidelines for this, it's actually 225, but a lot of systems have gotten a reduced, back it used to be 360 when the last time that the study was done. That was the state planning standards. Those state planning standards have been reduced quite substantially to 225. But if you, at that time, if you used 360 and you had gotten a reduction for wastewater planning standards, you could use a 240. We've used 240. So we've got a charge on the wastewater side of $5,068. So when we look at the current fees versus these calculated fees, you can see here the existing water fee for, and we'll just focus on the smallest meter, is $2,758. We're talking about it dropping to $2,528, drops about $230, an 8% change. And then on the sewer side, the existing fee, $3,048 is the proposed fee, $5,068 is the $2,020 difference. So that fee is escalated or increased by 66%. And then you can see those fees are calculated for a 3/4 inch meter, single-family home. They are escalated by meter size, and the way that they are escalated is by the flow differentials between the meter size. If you look at how much a 3/4 inch meter can flow versus a 1 inch or 1 1/2, 2 inch, that's how those are escalated. That is documented in AWWA M1 manuals, Water Environment Federation manuals, so that is a pretty well-known number, so that's what's used to escalate those meters.
So it's fair to say that this system development fee process, review process, is really rebalancing the system development fee based on the current projected projects. And that the net impact is that the system development fees combined for water and wastewater are increasing.
Yeah, I think it's, look here on the next slide, I've got it, $1,789, so $1,789 for a 3/4 inch meter.
There you go.
Let's see.
And these fees, who's taking on the cost of them?
So this is the one-time fee that is charged for new development. So typically it's paid for from a developer or a builder, and they usually typically roll it through the cost of the home, into the cost of the home.
So this is
This does not affect your existing customers. This would be new customers.
$8,000 per unit.
On those fees, say like it was end up being 268, why wouldn't we just round it up to 300? Is that illegal?
I'm trying to, which number?
All of the fees for the sewer and the water, when it's over 50, can we round it up?
It's a prescribed calculation
Oh,
based
okay.
off of your capital project
Okay,
expected expenditures.
okay.
The fee is paid at the very beginning, correct? Is that
Right.
once they move forward? Or is it scheduled?
Scott, our Lisa, where's Lisa go? There she is. System development, so this has changed over the years. The question is, are system development fees paid up? They're not paid when the development is approved. They're paid when the building permit is issued.
Correct.
So, used to, if a developer came in with a 100-lot subdivision, then they would write a check, whatever the system development fees were times 100. And you would get all that, whether they built those lots this year, next year, or 5 years from now. My understanding is that the legislature changed that so that those fees are only paid at the time that the building permit is issued.
So if I have a build out that, let's say, takes 5 years, it's possible. So it's not that they'll pay this exact fee as that thing, like Brandon Oaks, as an example, it took several years for that to build out, correct? So this can be adjusted and that individual may pay more at the end of the life or at the end of the build out than they are paying now. In other words, when I get that approval, that doesn't hold me to this.
Should be whatever the system development fee is at the time that the permit is issued.
So, okay.
So, another point is that system development fees can't just arbitrarily be reset. You know, you have to go, there's a time frame.
Sure.
Like we've done this study.
When was the last time this was done, Mr. Watson?
6 years ago.
6 years ago.
So it's 66% more now for sewer than what it was before,
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Yeah.
I guess
And
my
then
question would be, if I get in right now and I want to build, and this is going to be just a crazy number, I want to build 750 homes, and it takes me 7 years to finally get that all built out. 5 years from now, it's possible that this person is going to be held under this, or will that change for the last 150 homes?
It depends on whatever the fee is at that time.
Gotcha. That's all I was asking.
So-
So they're under this, no matter
So
what they're building.
hypothetical. So
Gotcha.
since we're talking hypotheticals, okay? Let's say you got a subdivision, 750 homes. This is, this new fee structure goes into place January the 1st. And they come to pull permits for 300 of those homes. And it's 4 years from now. And the city goes through this process again. And let's say there's the future capital projects are much less. This system development fee number is going to be less. So for the remainder of those, whatever the fee is,
That's what I was trying to make sure. I'm just trying to make sure. you know, if
it's
there's a
all
hiccup.
predicated off of what it's going to cost to build and or replace the infrastructure.
Gotcha.
And Ms. LaVonda, to be clear, is this $8,000 fee based on a building unit or a meter? In other words,
It's based on a meter, so
so
whatever
every
size of
townhouse,
meter.
every townhouse, every separately metered apartment would get the same $8,000 charge.
So,
But I have a question for Mr. Clark. Where we have multifamily units or apartments where that we have a policy for master metering all of those units, how does this apply?
And it would be paid, based off of the meter size. So if it's if they are all going to be rental units and not townhomes where they'll be individually owned, typically over 100, they would pay it off of the meter size that is determined by their engineer who develops and designs their system. So fire flow, 4-inch, 6-inch, it's based on the meter size as it's indicated.
Okay, so regardless if it's master metered or not, it just depends on the meter size.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
A couple of things to point out. These are, when we're talking about rounding the fees and rounding them up and rounding them down, these are kind of the maximum cost justified fee. You don't have to implement the $5,000, $5,068. It could be something lower. But this is really kind of the maximum that you should implement based on the assumptions that we've got in here. Another thing that just because I know that you all have industry, if there is an industry that is coming into town, I mean, one of the things that we can do, if there is a meter that is, larger than a 3-inch meter, we could put language in there that says, we reserve the right to true this up based on your actual usage. A lot of times when you assess these fees by meter charge, as you get up in the larger meters, it might underestimate the flow that they're actually going to use. So if you've got someone coming in with a 6-inch meter or an 8-inch meter, like something big, we could put language in there that says we reserve the right to true it up based on actual usage.
my concern would be apartment complexes and that type of thing, where they come in there and get a master meter, but we're not capturing
Yeah.
exactly what the usage is, especially with the sewer and the water and all that stuff.
this assumes there's only so much fluid that can go through a certain size pipe.
That's true. This is true. This is true.
All right, so key takeaways, just to kind of summarize everything that we talked about. We talked about, the level of rate adjustments that are needed for fiscal year 26 through 28. We're putting these out there. I think it's the Water Resources Department's, I think it's their plan to kind of look at these annually, these rate increases. So we're putting these out there as what we, based on the best available information that we've got now. But as we go through this process of, just say, for example, you put that 8% in this year, and then we look at it next year, and it needs to be something different. The thought is that we could potentially tweak it. But we've got right now 8% across the board increases each year for fiscal year 26 through 28. That's with Union County participation. Without Union County, it looks like 10% each year across the board. We talked about 3 different ways of recovering that level of revenue. You can either do the 8% across the board. We can do a separate fixed and variable, the 4 and the 9 that we talked about. We can also do a 4% on the fixed, and then that tiered rate structure for the residential customers, and then that irrigation rate is that 3rd tier rate. So those are the different rate structures. Lastly, system development fees. There is a reduction in the system development fees for water. It drops about $231 for that lowest ERU, which is the single family residential. On the flip side, on sewer, it goes up about $2,000. That is even with those lower level of services that are now being used, the 360 versus the 400, and the 240 versus the 360 that was used the last time. That, again, the legislation has changed. That's become a focus. So that is something that we were focused on when doing the calculation. But based on these numbers, it's an overall increase for a residential home of $1,789 for that smallest meter size. And just kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about these things that it is a process to adopt them. And usually it's, a 3 to 4 month process to actually go through the steps that are required to formally adopt these fees. And with that, that's all I've got. I don't know if you guys have any more questions or...
Any other questions? That was some good discussion.
Well, so, I don't mean to, just to make sure I'm understanding the consensus on this, will need to come this afternoon.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Or at least no later than tomorrow afternoon.
Yes.
That's what the council should say. Show your guys' level of comfort. I mean, we definitely put this slide back up when it comes time to talk about that. And so,
I mean,
yeah.
personally, I'm comfortable
Yeah, but
consensusing as much as we can, as quickly as we can.
I really want y'all to see the project first.
Gotcha. No, I get that. I totally
That
understand.
is a high dollar number, and you get comfort with that before we move.
We'll just tackle it today, move forward, tackle it tomorrow. Perfect.
Any other questions for the presenter? Any other questions for Mr. Scott Clark?
I think y'all would maybe put it, at our level so we can understand.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
That really does help.
It does.
I definitely want you guys to understand it because I think, it's important to have informed decisions.
Well, there's also a lot of questions that will come to the, from the community, and this really helps us. Thank
It
you.
does.
Clarification on the water, that did not include potential use of the quarry lake,
Well,
correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
It does not include the cost of developing that.
So that's an extra cost.
But there are projects to keep our current water plant operating at its peak efficiency and replacing aged infrastructure.
Water tower.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big project.
Okay. Any other questions? Are y'all going to let Scott Clark off the hook this evening?
Oh, you said he's coming back, though. We let him eat first.
Oh, okay.
He'll do better after he eats.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you so much. It is now 11:25. This, what's that?
Call for recess.
We can come for a recess, so let me explain what we're gonna do. I don't know if lunch is ready back there, we'll figure that out. During the, I'm sorry.
So, we have, for the noon hour, another special guest is an economist to talk to you more specifically about the economy in the state, in the region, how that impacts Monroe, has impacted Monroe, is impacting Monroe, and what the future looks like. Okay? I would suggest that as it, lunch at 12. Okay,
We're on top of
so lunch at 12, we're on time. Is there, do you want to have any, you want to use this time now for any discussion amongst council? Or would you prefer to take a break and get lunch and then hear from the economists?
Is there anything we can hear that would take about 30 minutes?
It's all part and parcel of the same stuff.
I think we're good. Let everybody take a break. I think is really the best.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's walk around, warm up a little bit.
Okay, so we're gonna recess, and council wants to recess right now, and we'll reconvene.
Okay, I'll call recess till noon. I'll
Okay.
have working lunch, right?
All right, working lunch, very good, we'll do that.